Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Spend Matters and our sponsor, MBO Partners, as we present direct source and engage highly skilled independent talent with controlled cost and risk. My name is Kendra Cato, and I am the manager of client services here at Spend Matters. I have the pleasure of running things behind the scenes today, so I'd just like to quickly cover a few procedural matters before you hear from our expert panelists. First things first, to answer our most popular question, you will be receiving a copy of the slides from today's webinar. So just check your inbox for an email with slides and a link to the recorded event, and you'll have that by early next week. We have such an engaging discussion planned with our presenters today, but we want to hear from you as well. We all know it's much more fun to listen to an interactive conversation rather than simply watching slides on the screen. Seriously, nothing makes us happier than challenging current industry dialogue amongst our presenters and our participants. So if you need clarification on a point or have a comment or a question for the speakers at any time, please do not hesitate to jump in. The question panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar is all yours. Please use it. And with that being said, I'm so excited to introduce today's presenters. We have with us today Jason Bush from Spend Matters, founder and managing director, Andrew Carpy, our research analyst of services and labor procurement, and from MBO Partners, we have Mr. Dennis Kanagai and Dustin Talley, the chief client officer and director of solution design. Jason, I'd like to hand it over to you to cover a little bit more information about Spend Matters, and so we can get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Kendra. Really appreciate it. Super excited to be presenting today. As we all know, the world of services procurement is evolving dramatically, and understanding all the nuances of how one can look at managing independent contractors and freelancers and traditional staffing firms and how this all ties together is something we're very keen to understand here at Spend Matters and Azul Partners, and we're thrilled to be working with MBO Partners on this too. Just some super quick background on Spend Matters. We were founded in 2004. I started it as a humble blog back then. It's now evolved into 11 different websites, I think about 5 different research services, and a team, super talented team of about 30 people. So super excited to tie in our broader coverage of services procurement to a range of areas, and we try and do so across our network. So for example, what is the implication of looking at the contingent workforce within manufacturing through our metal miner site? What are the implications of looking at payment and payment flow based on our work with trade financing matters? So we really try and take a holistic perspective on it. So that's enough for me. We've got a lot of great material. I'm going to pass it over to Dennis to give some background on MBO Partners and kick things off.
Great, Jason. Thanks. This is Dennis, and again, we're very pleased to be here today. And I'm going to kick it off first by just giving the quick background on MBO Partners. And basically, we have been in business for about 26 years, and simply put, our mission has really been able to make it easy and safe for self-employed professionals and their clients to work together. And we started off really by providing solutions specifically to the independent contractor for them to be able to manage their business easier, faster, and more compliantly. And that's still a major focus of our services. But about 7 or 8 years ago, we started to again focus and take our show to the enterprise world, which are the Fortune 1000. And in that, we've been fortunate enough to put together a variety of unique and customized compliance solutions. They really focus on the engagement and proper payment and management of these internally sourced ICs. The ICs are independent contractors that our hiring managers within our corporate clients do find. And with that, we came up with what has become sort of an industry standard of the independent contractor engagement specialist, which is really, the services provided to do the proper assessment, but then once you assess, determine, how do you properly engage with them in a win-win scenario that is good for the client as well as good for the independent contractor. We also, from a key credential standpoint, have been fortunate enough in the last couple of years with the payrolling and IC evaluation landscape report from SIA to be recognized as the largest agency of record provider in this space, having the most experience as it relates to the material we bring for implementation and so on, the shortest onboarding times, and again, the highest percentage of Fortune 500 accounts with a fairly good retention rate of about 98%. Okay, so with the regulatory commercial there, I'm going to go ahead and tee this off. And again, our topic today is really kind of around this new and fast-paced and ever-evolving area of direct sourcing of this very highly skilled independent talent. And as a sort of a lover of history and student of history, and realizing that history does have a tendency to repeat itself, I wanted to kind of start off the presentation by just quickly going over some, industries that currently do have some fairly mature direct sourcing, solutions in place. And primarily to say, what happened, how did they involve, and are there some lessons learned so we don't repeat any mistakes, but also to leverage their successes. So I picked 5, and there are probably 100 more other industries where this direct sourcing has come into play. But if you remember from a banking standpoint, I don't know how many people are old enough, but I certainly do. I remember standing in lines talking to tellers, to now kind of online banking and and so on. And I don't think I've stepped in a bank in about 10 or 15 years.
And I didn't even know you could go into a bank.
Yeah, nice, Dustin. From an online retail standpoint, again, the whole experience of having to go to a shop and buy and look at things to now being able to buy just about anything, from an online experience standpoint. Entertainment. Some of you may remember the old blockbusters and the Hollywood videos that are now kind of, gone into the wind and are now getting entertainment and movies and so on through live streaming, Netflix, and so on. Same sort of trends in, travel, where before you used to have to go to travel agents or stand in line in airports, and now, again, being able to have all these aggregators of services as well as online checking and so on, and purchasing the tickets with airlines. And lastly, in the music, the iTunes, same sort of having to now go to, or previously going to a record store, that kind of shows my age, but now being able to get the actual music and stuff online. So if you look at all of these, they all sort of share a couple of pretty major trends, is that it's really where technology and the internet has really brought millions of buyers who want to buy something to directly to the source of what they want to buy. And in that, sort of disintermediating kind of the current way or the old method of doing business. So again, gone are the blockbuster stores and and so on in this new wave and the new trend of creating this direct sourcing solution. The other thing that I want to bring up is that another theme that's impacted all of these that I think we need to really consider is the legal ramifications that impact each one of these. Like you think about the security requirements and the legal things that are involved with secure online banking. That's really become a huge thing, and it's impacted how that direct sourcing solution has evolved. The same thing with online shopping and retailing. Because you think about really wasn't up till about 5 or 6 years ago where the states decided, hey, we wanted to collect our sales tax. So now being able to include sales tax in with that particular model became, a requirement. Same thing with Netflix as royalties and so on to the movies and the other people within the supply chain. And I think the biggest one is, within the music industry. I don't know how many of you remember Napster, but that really was the original kind of, online exchange of music. But they really didn't understand the whole royalty and the whole legal aspects of it, and they basically went away. And iTunes now figured it out, as well as some others, and again, it's really sort of created a really good solution, for again all these industries. So Sorry, we've got right in the middle of a storm, so if you hear thunder in the background, we're sorry. um, and I guess this is a good, speaking of thunder, this is a good segue. The reason why we talked about that is we've seen these sort of similar sort of trends and things that we want to make sure we all understand, as we start to develop and define and create direct, sourcing solutions for these highly skilled independent talent. And, as a buyer to understand what does that landscape look like and what solution is best, for my individual company and requirements. So we talked to a lot of clients and sort of basically have talked about this is the perfect storm. And it's really sort of 4 trends, and we just lost power, I think, that we've seen that are going on in this perfect storm. One is the society trend, which is the supply, that the number of independent contractors is growing. On the buy side, there's an accelerated use by companies for this independent talent. Technology, just like in the other, is increasing the direct sourcing through virtual tools and marketplaces and so on. But there's also the regulatory trends that are also swirling around in this sort of perfect storm that all have major impacts on, how you create your direct sourcing solutions in the talent landscape. So what I want to do is just very quickly go through some of these these trends. The first is on the supply side. MBO has been doing, and this will be our 5th year, of a state of independence. It really is the first at looking at the demographics and, who are these independent workers and trends and so on. So we will be having our 5th State of Independence being published and available in September. But some trends that we've seen that it is one, the number of workers continue to grow that have choosing to be independent talent. We're estimating by 2019 that number will be over 40 million. The other interesting thing is if you look over the last 4 or 5 years, the number of independent workers that have chosen to, choose this lifestyle of working has grown about 12%, which is interesting because the U.S., unemployment and job creation rate is only grown by 7%. And lastly, if you take a look at the number of individuals that have chosen to become independent and are earning more than 100K a year, that has grown over 45% as well. So major trending from a supply standpoint. And also, as we look at some of the demographics, every year over year, it's been increasing the number of independents that are happy and have decided that, they really do like this lifestyle of independence. And if you take a look at the worker by age group, and this is 2014 data, you can see the representation of the seniors, the boomers, the Gen Y, and Gen X. Interestingly enough, it seems to have cut across all age groups, but the fastest growing segments year over year from a trend standpoint have been the Gen Y and the boomers, which makes sense in that the Gen Y are really interested in quality of life and the balance of work and lifestyle. And a lot of boomers have, really come to a point that they can't retire comfortably and want to continue to work. So that seems to be, again, the larger segments of the independent workers that are growing, again, by age. So the first trend of supply in this perfect storm, which you see is increasing. And also on the buy side, there's just a number of articles, and I've chosen several here just to kind of highlight, some key points. The first is a group called the Chartered Global Management Accountants, and they did a study in 2014 titled New Ways of Working. And they went ahead and surveyed about almost 1,100 companies on a global basis. And, one of the things that they came back with is over a quarter of those organizations came back and said that half or more of their workforce currently is external, non-traditional full-time. And these comprise of contractors, outsourced service providers, temp staff, freelancers, and so on. Forbes had a great article in November of 2014 titled "What the Rise of the Freelance Economy Really Means for Businesses." And again, one of their major themes is that the shift to from traditional employee to external resources is accelerating and will continue to accelerate over the next 5 years. And lastly, oops, I think I went the wrong way here, sorry. Deloitte also in 2013 had a great article called "The Open Talent Economy," and one of their taglines up front was basically, if you jump ahead to the year 2020, half the people you rely on don't actually work for you, and that's a good thing if you're ready. So again, if you take a look at all the pundits and kind of all of the material, this demand side or the buy side is continuing to grow. And if again, from that chartered global, God, I hit the wrong one, sorry. They asked the people in the respondees, you know, who were or what were the sort of skill sets that you think were going to be the largest amount of talent that you were going to go externally. And if you look at this, highly paid and highly skilled workers were number one, freelancers, contractors, consultants, external advisors, and also interestingly, semi-retired talent, the alumni of people that are leaving, retiring, but also coming back. And lastly, on the buy side, one of the things that we do is try to determine the amount of spend, you know, within this group. And in the U.S. in 2014, we're estimating that the spend for these highly talented independent workers reached about 1.1 trillion, which is not insignificant. Did that work? I think we lost. There goes me. Sorry, having a little bit of pilot difficulty here. And the last point here is that McKinsey put out an article that said that by 2025, the global GDP will have a net increase through these online talent networks and external buys, if you will, of an additional 2.7 trillion. So again, the supply side is growing, the buy side is growing, all tendencies of trying to get these buyers and sellers, you know, working together. And now I want to talk about and actually turn it over to Andrew to kind of talk about the trends from a technology standpoint that are enabling this direct sourcing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dennis. And in fact, technology and what we're calling digital platforms, which would include businesses that we've seen in other sectors, such as Airbnb and Amazon, which are well known, are actually what make going direct possible. And they're particular forms of technology that do that. Of course, here at Spend Matters, we're very interested to understand what role that plays for procurement organizations. Outside of services and contingent workforce, there's been already an evolution toward the use of platforms and networks, source-to-pay types of applications, solutions. But in the contingent workforce sector, that evolution has been a bit slower and different, and we would expect that how platforms emerge in different sectors would be different. We have tracked what we call work intermediation platforms, and I'm not going to really try to go into that, but it's basically, you know, if that Amazon is a retail platform, someone can buy whatever they need, or at iTunes, you can get your music directly. In this case, it's a way of direct sourcing workforce. And if you look at the chart here, you'll see that the number of platforms, and this is across the world, has been growing and growing at an accelerating rate, to the point where today there are about 300 platforms, and that's growing weekly, and they take many different forms. Some of them are marketplace, probably the majority of them are marketplace platforms. And there are probably in excess of 30 million workers that are registered on these platforms, and that is a fast-growing number as well, as evidenced by the data that we see. So I'd like to, now that I've introduced this concept of platforms in the world of work and contingent workforce, I'd like to kind of quickly take us through kind of the evolution of these platforms and how that is changing, how it's coming together with the established contingent workforce supply chain. So this is going back about 10 years ago, so this would be about 2005. The contingent workforce supply chain that we're all familiar with and is depicted here with the essential components was really the foundation for that was already well established. Temporary workers were being provided to large enterprises. Over time, SOW became an important type of contingent workforce deliverable. So this supply chain kind of existed on its own, largely geared to larger enterprises and also geared to, as the box on the right-hand side suggests, a kind of a limited scope of the workforce. At the same time, I'll point out that there is a white space underneath that at that time, and let's move to the next slide. So 5 years ago, and it actually started to happen, but it was off the radar 10 years ago. But by 5 years ago, we started to the year 2010. There were probably already about 100 of these work intermediation platforms that were starting to actually conduct substantial business and scale. Now, the interesting thing about these work intermediation platforms, and they are direct. This is a direct model versus the other contingent workforce supply chain, which is clearly an indirect model. At this particular time, these WIPs tended to serve mainly small businesses, but they accessed a much larger workforce. And so some of these you're familiar with companies like what was called Elance and Odesk. And these companies even had the ability to source and directly engage workers that could be in other parts of the world and have them perform work. But essentially, this was at this stage of the game in 2010, something that was happening entirely outside of the mainstream established contingent workforce supply chain. So let's flip ahead. So approximately 2 to 3 years ago, and that would be around 2012, 2013. Something started to change, and I would describe that as there started to be awareness among the different parties and players in the existing traditional contingent workforce supply chain. Awareness started to grow that there were these platforms out there, and believe me, probably 2012. I'm familiar with some surveys of contingent workforce buyers that were done. The awareness was nil, and then after that, we started to see it trending up, and it still has been trending up. The other thing that started to change in this period is that there started to be engagement between WIPs and some of these contemporary or existing contingent workforce supply chain players. And so you started to see some of these platforms and some of these VMS and MSP and even staffing suppliers beginning to talk to one another about how do we work together? What do we do? Maybe the beginning of some partnerships as well. I'm familiar with, for example, was in that time frame that Kelly did a partnership with Odesk, and there were a few other notable ones. So this was kind of the next stage of the emergence of these platforms and really a convergence with the other existing contingent workforce supply chain players, and they're starting to turn and notice these models and trying to figure out what do we do about them, how do we adopt them, which brings us to kind of the next stage of things. And in the last 1 to 2 years, a number of these platform players coming from very different directions and very interested in trying to tap into the enterprise demand and serve the enterprise demand and bring a broader workforce population to the enterprise, began to develop solutions, technology solutions, which were different from the WIPs that went before. And how they were different was that these were platforms that were really geared to serve individual enterprises. And the real purpose of these platforms was to allow enterprises to aggregate on a digital platform, to aggregate all of their independent workforce, their non-staffing supplied and non-employee workforce on a single digital platform, and to be able to manage that workforce in different ways. And, of course, to provide hiring managers with direct access to that. Now, FMS is kind of a tricky term, and there's probably more going on than is described by this particular concept and name, but that's a whole other discussion. When you look at the players that seem to kind of fit into this FMS category, you see that the solutions are actually, even though they're alike in many ways, they are, different in many ways too. So some have come from different places. One, for example, some of them have come from the IT field services space. Elance Odesk has a FMS offering. It came from the online virtual freelance marketplace space. MBO Partners, of course, came from the compliance space and from the independent contractor space, and is also moving in this direction of FMS. And so I think the important thing here is that there's been an evolution of these online platforms, this type of platform, technology platform model that we've seen in so many other sectors of the economy, and it has been evolving over time. And this last stage of evolution has really brought it much closer to the enterprise as a way to bridge enterprise demand and this growing supply of independent workforce, potentially all over the world, which hasn't been tapped into in a time of talent shortage. So that's what I have to say here, and we can turn it back to Dennis.
Great, Andrew. Thank you very much. So again, going back to that perfect storm analogy, we talked about supply increasing, demand increasing, and as Andrew eloquently said, technology and the various industry players and solutions that are coming into play in this direct sourcing of talent. So the last piece there was, again, as Andrew mentioned, MBO coming from a compliance perspective is really ensuring that that people are aware and don't overlook sort of the importance of ensuring that you assess and engage these people compliantly so that you mitigate any risks associated with audits, penalties for miscompliance and misuse of or misengagement of these independent contractors. So on the screen is kind of a quick summary of some just recent legislation, and I'm not going to go over all of these obviously, but wanted to just point out three specific trends. First of all, when we start talking about miscompliance in the IC space, it was really spearheaded by the IRS, again looking for missed tax revenue that they were now not getting from corporations that were paying them monthly from their full-time employees side of the business. And really in the last 18 months or so, the IRS has been joined very aggressively by Department of Labor and primarily FLSA, overtime, wage and hour sort of issues, where they've gone in and audited and looked at miscompliance, if you will, and misuse of these independent contractors to try to get back, tax revenues, particularly around state unemployment, funding that they provide to the states. So it's really become kind of a two-headed horse. And it's not only just at the federal level. The second point is that each individual state has their own sort of compliance test, if you will, about how they determine miscompliance and misuse of the independent contractors. Some states more aggressive than others. But so it's not only at the federal level, it's at the state level. And the major thing here is you'll see that they're starting to work together. 22 states have signed, Kentucky being the last one, these memorandums of understanding where the states and the various federal agencies are sharing information, if you will, about their audits. So it's almost kind of a trifecta, if you will, of audit risk from all these various agencies and state departments, in this independent world today. Okay. Another way of looking at this is something that we have put together called the Compliance Tug-of-War. And as I mentioned, on the right side, the IRS, Department of Labor in the states, it's really about a money game in trying to regroup or get tax revenue shortfalls that are not coming particularly from the independent contractors who the studies have said that are sort of not adequately reporting their wages or monies earned and paying their self-employment tax. So there's quite a bit of shortfall of taxes both at the IRS, Department of Labor, and state. And so there really is this tug-of-war between the agencies on the right and the temps, freelancers, and independent workers on the left, where the agencies are really trying to determine an employee-employee relationship through a variety of tests that they have. The IRS has their common law tests. DOL has somewhat the same, but also focuses on different entities in their economic realities test. And every state has their ABC tests that are, again, similar but different based upon the state. So there is this tug-of-war of these agencies trying to determine from a classification standpoint, are these independent workers who are being deemed as independent, do they really have an employee-employee relationship? And if so, then providing penalties and so on to the organization as it relates to back taxes and fines that they would then need to pay. So if you take a look at what's going on in the industry, and it's hard not to see a new case or a new situation come up on a daily basis, but many of you hopefully have ever heard or read about the Uber scenario. There was most recently probably about 3 weeks ago, the California Department of Labor deemed that an individual driver really was an employee of Uber. And even though that was a case of one, which was deemed a $4,000 fine, it really has sort of opened up the floodgates for upwards to I think about 100,000 potential workers in California that could add up to over $209 million of reclassification risk of these drivers for Uber. Many of you have probably read about FedEx. They've become, in many ways, the poster child of misclassification. Many states have already settled with FedEx, and the most recent one was about a month ago in California, where FedEx has proposed a $228 million settlement with California with over 2,300 drivers, so they're the FedEx drivers who have been reclassified, again, as their employees that had traditionally been paying on a 1099. The third one there is Homejoy, and this is, I think, just about a week ago, they've decided to pull the plug, literally. They were a cleaning company, and based upon 4 or 5 major suits that they had against them for misclassification, they have decided that they're going to close the doors. And the last one there, from a Google standpoint, there was a scenario with Google who had utilized some online marketing tools to engage an independent contractor. That contractor became sort of a class of one in New York City, and finally sued that he really should have been working or be treated as an employee, wasn't being paid for overtime, being directed and controlled by Google, and so on and so on. Just yesterday, that case was actually settled for an undisclosed amount. But again, from a Google perspective, it did cost them some some dollars and so on to be able to make this go away. So lastly, before I turn it over to Dustin to talk about the MBO sort of thoughts about the direct sourcing, I wanted to take this down. We've been talking about an industry level. You kind of take this down to a company level, and what many of you from a procurement standpoint may be seeing in your companies today. And this is a pretty basic quadrant, if you will, that measures engagement risk. This is misclassification risk of how this is currently being sourced, high to the left, low to the right. And then going up on the y-axis, the complexity of the buy. Is it more low from basically a task-oriented type of buy that you're bringing this talent in for, to more highly complex project-oriented with higher sum, more complexity, and so on. So if you go to the upper left, the current state, and this is where where we see going into clients, where every manager who has their budget and their need is going out there and sourcing and finding probably the only person in the universe that can do their job. They cut a deal and they put them to work, and then sometimes they figure out, well, how am I going to pay these people? And we kind of liken that to really the wild, wild west. It is kind of herding a bunch of cats, if you will, that are on steroids. And this does have, a high risk as it relates to, the compliance and the assessment of the talent that's being brought in, as well as the fact that the individuals that these managers are sourcing are generally pretty talented, high-level independent people. So that upper left quadrant is really the area where MBO has done well in working with large companies and putting together, a very customized but controlled independent contractor engagement solution that provides consistency, visibility, controls, and risk mitigation. If you go to the lower right, where there is lower risk, but the tasks are somewhat low or more staff aug, it really is, currently sourced or through MSP, VMS, and staffing firms. And in that scenario, the risk is relatively low because, again, most of the MSPs require the staffing organizations to only engage people on a W-2 with no 1099s. And the task, from a complexity standpoint, can be low to medium high, but primarily staff augmentation, if you will, from a requirement perspective. The interesting thing, as Andrew mentioned, some of the online staffing tools and so on that are really coming into play, it's really allowing organizations to be a company of one that can provide recruited resources to your managers. But again, you want to make sure that from a compliance standpoint that they're being engaged properly. And the lower left is the whole freelancer marketplace that Andrew mentioned too, where they're really, taking buyers, millions of buyers, if you will, and introducing them to, service providers that are really doing kind of the low task, high volume, low dollar amount, engagements. And these are the online freelance marketplaces like freelancers.com, Guru, Average Nerd, and there's hundreds of them out there, as Andrew mentioned. And the tasks are low, and as we've seen from some of the trends, these marketplaces are starting to get, a spotlight on some of these compliance agencies as it relates to, are these people really your employee or not? And the compliance, mitigation risks, if you will, aren't certainly there in the majority of these online marketplaces. So going up to the upper right, which is really where MBO is really positioning ourselves as sort of managed talent networks that is, again, Andrew had mentioned, that are sort of private clouds, if you will, or repositories for our enterprise clients. But it's easy to source, easy to use, but it really stresses the compliance and the safe engagement of each individual, project as part of our overall, solution. So I'm going to turn it over to Dustin right now to spend a little bit of time talking a little bit more about the MBO approach.
Thanks, Dennis. So yeah, we want to talk more about, what is this next practice? What is the managed talent network? And really, how can it bring us safe, cost-effective solutions that's going to make it easy for you to engage your talent, really to source, curate, and engage with a high priority on that engagement piece. So with that in mind, just want to give you a quick stat. So we mentioned earlier that the workforce is changing quite a bit, and more of this project-based economy is coming to be in the enterprise. And so with that, more contractors are being engaged. And so 65% of companies are saying that the creation of a visible talent pool is the largest contractor workforce-related issue they have today. So with all of these systems out there and all of these various, WIPs or FMSs or marketplaces, they're still trying to figure it out, right? So that's where we are in 2015. And so MBO's got a pretty unique approach to this. I want to talk about really our full service model and how we believe this fits in all 4 of those quadrants, and with a high focus on engagement and mitigating that risk. So at the very top, you see here the client sourcing need. We've got a product that we call MBO Connect. And MBO Connect would fit into that category that Andrew was mentioning, either FMS or the WIP, the work intermediation platform. And really, MBO Connect is about talent being added to this place, your talent being added to this place, your contract talent, I should say, so that you can identify them, redeploy them, negotiate rates, and select talent to continue engaging them on projects. It's interesting that we're in 2015 and we don't have something great like that, not a central place that people put talent. So again, 65% of people are looking for something like that, and everybody's trying to race to that. MBO, again, coming from the market where we really focus on compliance, the next step in our process is to assess the talent that you're engaging through this this marketplace, if you will, or this what we're calling a market network. So the assessment of that talent is really important. Here at MBO, we have a technology-enabled process and a team that's very high touch. We call them our vendor advisory services team, that is literally looking at every single engagement a company would send our way, and we're making sure that they are engaged properly here in the bottom, toward the bottom of the quadrant. So the engagement at MBO, we have 3 different engagement services. I won't spend too much time on those. If anyone's familiar with MBO, though, we have a very compliant payroll solution, just like others out there. We have a very strong compliance assessment, the assessment that we just mentioned, and we call that our MBO sub-service when you do have qualified subcontractors or independent talent that you're going to work with. And then the MBO exec service, which is really a differentiator, a different solution that MBO brings to the market that still allows those self-employed professionals to continue to act and operate that way with you as a client. And so that engage and pay we view as the really important piece. So while I'm on that, as we looked at the quadrant Dennis shared just to mention a moment ago, the bottom left, you look at the FMS within that quadrant. And while they have an area to really connect with that talent, if you will, somewhat assess from a technology perspective, the engagement in most of those platforms is solely 1099. And so with that, as Dennis mentioned, all of those different articles that are starting to pop up, many of them in a consumer fashion. Now we as an enterprise, as we start looking at these platforms and using them, we've got to focus on that as well. So MBO really believes engage and pay is a strong focus that the enterprise is going to want. Beyond that, MBO is very high on support. We're very heavy on supporting the independent contractor coming from that space the last 26 years. We give a dedicated representative to each of the independent consultants that come our way. And really that's their kind of feet on the ground here at MBO to help them act and operate as an independent business, but really to interact with you as a client. So we support them in that, really hold their hand, help make it a positive experience for the individual. With that in mind, it actually helps us and gives us warning signs. So having that hands-on approach, if we see things that these cases that we start to see crop up, we hear about these much earlier on in the process by having that handheld support kind of mentality. And then lastly is the account management. We have a strong focus on our clients. So we continuously improve our accounts, the reporting that clients want. We want to give that to them in a way that's meaningful to them so that they can do something with that data. And then constantly educate your stakeholders within your business so that you can access this talent in a meaningful way. So how would an enterprise go about building out a talent pool? How would you take something like the Talent Market Network and get started? Glad you asked. So we have a few ways we think you can start putting talent into a place like this. All of us are engaging talent today, so we've got our active contractors here on the left-hand side of the cloud. You've got existing payrollers perhaps, which I'll touch on in just a moment. Small vendors that you engage. I know you as procurement professionals likely engage individuals on a regular basis and you're setting them up as vendors within your systems. We believe a place like this might be the right spot for those individuals and those small firms. Recruiting efforts. So if you have silver medalists, either on the full-time side or on the contract side, there's a lot of recruiting effort that goes into finding resources, and we believe that talent that's not placed can actually live in a place like the Talent Market Network. You've got the idea of an alumnus program or full-time folks that are retiring or leaving the workforce for various reasons, but still might consider project-based work. That's a big trend right now, and so this is something we're seeing a lot of our clients come to us with a need. So the Talent Market Network serves that need. Marketplace networks. So, we mentioned all of the different FMS systems out there. We believe that that is a great place to find talent. Some of it may be the lower dollar, lower kind of transactions. But as you go out to those marketplaces, those folks do need to be engaged compliantly. So our Talent Market Network has a strong API that feeds into those different spots and allows you to engage those workers, those resources coming from those places in your Talent Market Network in a compliant manner. And then lastly is we're just calling it a provider community. So as our community here at MBO grows, that's a community that also you have access to through a Talent Market Network like this, as do other providers that have solutions like this. With that in mind, I just want to kind of end with 3 quick use cases to get us thinking about how we could utilize something like a Talent Market Network. The first is this large upcoming project. So we have a client, it's a financial services client, that every December, they know that it's coming. They have a really, really large project. And so without fail, every November, they're kind of all panicking, trying to figure out where they're going to get this talent. And so with that, the solution is really to go out with an RFI type format, let their independent talent know that this is coming, really engage them in a manner of groups within our system, MBO Connect, and with that, essentially kind of get a pool of talent built up so that when December gets here, they're able to quickly deploy those individuals. So managers, instead of vetting real talent now in the month of July or August that we're about to be in, really gets to just push the opportunity out there, let them know that it's coming, let people get excited about it, build a talent pool that's going to be available to serve that need, and then vet them real time as the project gets closer. And so that certainly beats that last minute scramble of trying to find the talent by having it ready to go in your marketplace. Next up, and this is a really important one, and this is happening quite a bit today. As Dennis mentioned, kind of looking at those various industries in the beginning of the presentation, disruption is what took place in each of those industries, right? And so with the relationship with talent, or talent ownership as we're calling it here, that's a disruptive thing that's going on within our industry. Staffing firms continue to deploy talent and reuse, contractors are reused within some of these organizations for years and years and years, we find. In fact, we came into a client recently who has had workers working for upwards of 8 years with these different intermediary layers of staffing companies involved. And as you can imagine, the recruited rates still existed with these resources. So we believe by taking a strong approach and really enforcing or modifying your talent ownership clauses within your supplier contracts would allow you to feed this talent into a place like MBO Connect and then access that talent at a much more affordable rate. Yep, so you're going to see a lot of cost savings within something like that. And then lastly, let's see, next slide please.
I'm glad it wasn't just me.
Lastly is the idea of dynamic rates. So with dynamic rates, what we really mean in this is likely the same type of contractors are being engaged across your organization, but without that visibility, you don't know if you're paying the right rates for those resources. And so by opening up a talent pool and engaging these resources across departments and really adding, perhaps you've got several IT groups and a certain type of contractor amongst those IT groups, you start to see rates across those different groups. And it allows you as a procurement professional to really zero in on that and understand what the market rate should be for this. So again, I think this is just repeating industry trends. The more we start to give a place to see what's going on, the more we can make meaningful decisions about that. And obviously rates is an important one as you're dealing with these experts who charge, you know, upwards of hundreds and hundreds of dollars an hour per project. So that's another one. Just to end this out, I want to talk about a few advantages in accessing this talent directly and then really focusing on the risk and bettering your control. So first, this should increase your talent quality. We at MBO really believe in this concept of the client of choice. And so as we begin to see the independent workforce pick up and more folks going independent, more of you engaging independent talent, they're going to start to pick the clients that they enjoy to work with. And so what we want to see you do is increase your talent quality, but also really help them to adopt your program. Make it easy to work with you as a client so that you can become that client of choice. Next up, control the usage so you can really see what's actually happening versus herding those cats, as Dennis mentioned. Empower your users. So we believe this is really going to help you engage talent much quicker. If you know the talent, you have them ready, they're kind of on-demand talent. Again, that era of direct happening here. Cutting costs from your supply chain. And ultimately, with MBO, engaging those independent workers safely and compliantly. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kendra.
Thank you so much, Dustin. I appreciate it. Right now, we are going to open up this section for questions. We do have a few minutes left, so we had a couple questions roll in as we were presenting. The first one was, how would I begin to roll something like this out to my organization?
I'll take that one. This one's Dustin again.
Okay, great.
So we typically advise picking a group within your company that you believe there's heavy independent talent spend already, and introducing this as a new opportunity for them to source that independent talent. So many of the customers we've rolled our solution out with, we pick like IT, for example, and let them roll this out. IT usually is an early adopter of programs like this. So picking that group that has you know, heavy utilization, heavy redeployment, or a group that you just don't have visibility into and you think it's one where you need it, picking the right group is the right way to start the rollout process.
Okay. Okay, great. And another question that came through, gentlemen, was how does MBO typically deal with VMS and MSP when the client has them?
Hey, Kendra, this is Dennis. I'll go ahead and take that one.
Okay.
I think we do well, and I think it depends upon what the client is really, you know, trying to achieve. Right, about 40% of our enterprise clients have us sort of outside the MSP VMS as we're just managing, you know, the independent contractor spend. But the other 60 where we do work with the MSPs, we've worked with probably just about every, you know, MSP out there. And, you know, our best sort of case relationship is where we have a good, you know, relationship of trust. But, you know, the account teams also then realize that MBO is really dealing with an entity or an individual that is similar but very different from the recruited staffing temp agencies that they're working with. So when we work well with MSPs or when they realize that the MBO space is different and they allow us to do their thing and we work jointly together. We have quarterly business reviews where we both go to and report on, and we work well together through the entire process. And the same is similar, from a VMS standpoint. Just about probably about 90% of our enterprise clients have a VMS that we interface with. Some of the challenges we face are, getting some of the statement of work and some of the milestone billing and some nuances, integrated in with the statement of work, with the VMS platforms. But generally, we work well within that process from requisition creation to, engagement through billing and so on, and have a variety of, interfaces and ways that we've worked with pretty much all of the VMSs.
Okay, great. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today for this webinar, but thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And just as a reminder, please keep a lookout for the follow-up email that will include all of today's material and the recording. And also, we'll be writing a follow-up piece of research and series of posts on this topic, so check back on spinmatters.com for updates. And on behalf of Spin Matters and MBO Partners, thank you for taking time to participate in our presentation. Have a great day.